Hey, welcome back. So, in our continued discussion of anxiety, I want to explore social anxiety and specific phobias. Social anxiety is, of course, extremely common, and it's as basic as most of us ended up taking a public speaking course in college. And it's interesting to me that public speaking almost always ranks number one in fears that are so pervasive in our culture. Death, actually, the fear of dying, is in most research number two behind public speaking, which is really interesting. So, the bad news is you're dying, the good news is you won't have to give your own eulogy. I understand the discomfort that comes with social anxiety. I hear about it all the time whenever I'm encouraging folks to try a 12-step fellowship or go to a grief group or develop maybe a new interest or hobby. They have to explain to me in great detail how self conscious they feel and how insecure they are when they're faced with new people, places, and things, which is really the very basic nature of social anxiety. So, one of the things that I'll encourage people to do is to write down how they believe they're perceived, what kind of things they expect people to notice about them, what type of judgment they expect people to have of them. Because, of course, so much of this is pure projection. We decide that other people likely see us the way we see ourselves. But that's almost never the case. What I ask people to notice is, for example, when you look in a mirror, are you looking with an eye towards acceptance, or are you just looking for flaws? Are you being a fair judge of you, or are you a bit harsh in your estimation? When I look into a mirror, I think, good God, man, you look old. And I notice the bags under my eyes, and I notice that I've gained a few pounds, and then I very quickly remind myself that no good person cares about those things. They're things that I might be self conscious about, they're things that perhaps I have a lot of feelings about. But unless a person is especially vain, they always look better and come off better than they think they do. Because to the rest of us, we're not looking just for their flaws. We're looking for things to appreciate. We're looking for what's good about that person. And even when we are a person who accentuates the positives and looks for the best in others, we don't expect that other people to do that with us. So, the key to reversing social anxiety is, I think, to remind ourselves that not everyone's judgment is critical like ours is. And perhaps if we're able to relax and be ourselves, we can make that impression that we care to. And if we don't feel like we can relax and be ourselves, well, can we be honest? So, for example, when I do public speaking engagements, if I'm nervous, I say so. And what I notice is that people typically immediately soften because everybody knows what it's like to have that awkward, self conscious experience. And people, when asked to be patient, typically will be. So it's one more time where I'll encourage you to take pen and paper and maybe just some ideas about how you perceive you, how you expect to be perceived, and are there healthy people in your life? Are there good people in your life that agree with you, or do they tend to disagree? Because maybe it's time to change your perception of self. Maybe that perception has been warped by past relationships or by trauma, and that's something worth delving deep into. The common forms of phobia that I run into most frequently are agoraphobia and claustrophobia. Of course, there are many, many, many different fears that people have, and I think the average person struggles to understand those because they tend to be very irrational in nature. Um, when we say that something is irrational, I think we immediately discount its value. To me, something that is irrational is simply emotional in nature. And the more that I can tolerate irrationality in my perspective, the easier it is for me to understand mental illness, addiction, eating disorders, self harm, all of the things that people like me do to ourselves are much easier to understand when we can tolerate that irrationality. Agoraphobia tends to have strong connections to anxiety and social anxiety. It's the feeling of being trapped, exposed, humiliated. It's the feeling that a lot of us get actually in box stores, in supermarkets, and places like Walmart. We feel the impact of fluorescent lighting and large groups of people and aisles and kind of being trapped in this situation. Claustrophobia, of course, is the fear of small or cramped places. It's very common in the fear of flying. Sometimes when I process with people their fear of taking airplanes, what we really find is not a fear of flying per se, but rather a feeling of being trapped in a confined space in something that they have no control over. So I'm always encouraging folks to explore the roots of those fears and to get a sense of when in their lifetime those fears first developed or they first became aware of them, and to consider what else was happening in their life at that time. Because very often those fears have a connection to abuse or neglect or trauma. And in the next couple of videos, we're going to start exploring the impact of trauma and PTSD specifically and how we overcome that.